So let's talk about people. Resources, I should say. And we're going to talk about two parts of resources, money and people. Talk about people first. And this, both the state and the vendor are committing both of these. Concept here that key staff are called key staff for a reason. I have a saying I like to say that if you've got the A team with a B software product, you're probably going to be okay. If you have the B team with an A software product, you're not going to be okay. It's really about the people. It's not so much about the company, although obviously if they're big and they have lots of resources and lots of depth, and they've got methodologies and tool sets, that all helps. But when it comes right down to it, especially on these large projects, you're not really hiring a multi-billion-dollar company. You're hiring a few dozen people. And it's those few dozen people that are going to make or break the success of the project. So again, one of our advisory team members, is the phrase that key staff are a hill to die on. Are you getting the people? Are you getting continuity in key staff? This is something really to fight for. It's one of those make or break issues for a project. If you're going to go to bat on something, go to bat on key staff. And also manage the outcomes. There's a tricky line here you have to manage when it's a fixed price contract, because if you get too much into micromanaging the vendor's staff, then all of a sudden they have a certain amount of ability to come back to you and say, well, if things go wrong, well, it's your fault because you told me what to do with the team. I would have been okay if you just let me manage it as deliverables. So.
I definitely want that expertise to talk about that for sure. Yeah, I think it's a very interesting concept.
And one of the things that I've learned, and this, as a vendor, I've had the experience where we've been working on a project and we've had people that weren't really delivering, and we knew it, and maybe the client knew it, maybe they didn't, or maybe they just started to get to know it. The thing that I learned painfully over the course of several years, it never gets better with time. You've got to act quick. Now, if you're in a client situation, especially if it's a fixed price contract, you really have to manage the outcomes. You can't just say, well, I don't like that individual. But if you can document that they're not performing the job, move fast, because it's never going to get better. And it's in everybody's best interest to act quickly. It's in the vendor's best interest, it's in yours, it's in the individual's best interests as well.
On both sides, right? So
yeah, on both sides,
yes.
That is true.
Yes.
Yeah, this is absolutely critical, but I would have a little bit of a contrary. One is minimum qualifications, okay, with key staff, and make sure that they have those minimum and make them prove that. And then in a lot of contracts, in some of the contracts I've been involved in, you don't have to show lack of performance. If you want to make a change, you have the authority to designate that you want to make a change, regardless, and done that many times. It might be great people, it's just not a good fit, and it is key. It's people, not the product.
And what kind of pushback did you get from the vendors around that?
Sometimes not much, because I think in the back of their mind they knew it wasn't, and some very, very strong resistance, because it can be very difficult on them either to place that person or find somebody to come in. I mean, there's a lot of growth. Your comments about the company is absolutely essential. You've got a highly recognized world-class organization out there, but as they're growing, they're diluting their workforce, and a lot of times they use the projects as a training ground. I don't want to be the training ground. If you want to provide free resources to come in and do some mentoring with your folks, that's great, but I want your best and your brightest.
The other thing that...
Yeah, I was going to say, add to that is that's part of this is where the escalation path comes in your contract. If you are not getting success at that lower level of that change out, I've actually had to leverage that in the past and go to the service manager or higher to get a swap out, and usually that's successful.
The other thing that you have to live with here is, Sacramento is a pretty big marketplace for government consulting work, state of California, but you are on the extreme western edge of the country, and it's expensive to fly people in here. And if you're trying to bid on work here, it's hard to have a team that's traveling. Just logistically, they don't want to do it. If they live in the Eastern time zone, it's almost impossible to make a regular commute here for a long, long time. And it gets very, very expensive, and it's cost prohibitive to bid people who are basically Eastern time zone on work over here, especially when you're competing with maybe smaller firms that are doing local work. So what that often means, in my experience, is you get a team that's sort of, corporate HQ, high flyer types, and then they'll try and recruit a lot of people locally to actually fill the work. And there are advantages to having people there who are there Monday through Friday and don't have to travel, but they're not employees, and there are risks associated with that. And I'm seeing a lot of nodding, so I assume that's something you've run into over time. Okay. Talk about money a little bit. I want to talk about the state's money. I want to talk about the vendor's money. So how many people here, or does everybody here understand the concept of work in progress, or WIP? If you don't understand, raise your hand. Okay, so then I'm going to pick on somebody to give me a definition. Gentleman in the tie in the front table. Yes.
Work in progress is just as it sounds, the work in progress that hasn't been invoiced and paid for yet.
Exactly. Yes. That is a huge driver of vendor behavior. And it matters a lot in a private firm. It matters hugely in a publicly traded firm. A lot of the contracts we have are deliverable based, and so payment comes in increments over time. Get a deliverable accepted or a batch of deliverables, and usually, if you're a vendor, you will try and bid projects so you get paid every month. You'll try and make status reports, a paid deliverable or something, so you get money in every single month. It doesn't always work that way, and usually, if actually the contract is structured well, you will always be behind in getting paid. There'll always be money left out there that you will never be able to invoice as fast as you're burning through hours. If you are able to do that, then probably the state hasn't done their job in structuring the contract, because you don't really have anything, as an incentive to hang around. But that's a big driver. The way most accounting systems work for consulting companies, as money ages, it gets more expensive. So the corporate accounting folks have a system in place, and it varies company by company, but usually they're pretty similar, that after you haven't invoiced something for, say, 60 days, the corporate accounting system will start to doubt that you're ever going to get that money, and so they'll charge you a fee for it. And the fee gets bigger at 90 days and bigger at 120 days. And then it resets once you invoice, and it starts getting fees again and accounts receivable once you haven't collected on the bill for 60 days and 90 days and 120 days.
I was going to mention progress payments. One of the attributes we've seen is we see a vendor, we have a good working relationship, we want to keep that strategic partnership going, and developing a process and appropriate forms to approve progress payments for partial work completion during a month. We want, from a state perspective, I want to keep their cash flow going, especially for these smaller local firms. I know they need the funds to continue and pay their own employees. So that's worked out very well for us.
And so this sort of cycle of getting paid, and it's one of the instances potentially where there's something that's of real value to the vendor, which may be of slightly less value to you in terms of when is the money paid, because it has a direct financial implication. Even if the cash total never varies, the profitability of that project will vary significantly month by month on the way it's reported internally, depending on how well they're keeping up in terms of managing WIP. It's a big deal. Margin, I think everybody understands, people, there's margin associated with the work. My key point here is the vendors need to make money on the deal. If they don't, it's not good for anybody. Because as soon as they start to either lose money or recognize they're going to lose money, they will get a huge amount of pressure to start cutting corners. And so you really get the project manager is stuck between a rock and a hard place. They've got to deliver on a contract, they've got a client that they're trying to keep happy, they have corporate HQ on these monthly, or sometimes they can be weekly, status calls, which are not pretty a lot of the time, about where are you with margin, what are you doing to keep this project profitable, and it's a really stressful position for the vendor project manager. The more that they can make, whatever is the appropriate amount of money that was originally planned, the better they're going to be able to staff the project, they're going to be able to get access to resources internally better, you're going to see more responsiveness from their corporate headquarters as well. So that the lesson in a way from a procurement perspective is it's not getting the lowest possible fee, it's getting the fee that's appropriate for the work. And you obviously don't want them making too much money, but there's a certain amount of money they have to make in order for the relationship to work. So, do you have any thoughts about that side?
Actually, I have a question for you. So when the vendors put in a bid and they've underbid, and then they go and they've been picked, are they getting pressure to do something different, to make a different margin than what is going on within the bid?
If I understand the question correctly, then yes. I mean, different firms have different ways of measuring margin, like gross margin or operating profit on the project basis, but there's a certain percentage that will be a minimum that usually they're allowed to, bid a project on. And if it goes below that amount of margin, you have to get the risk management team involved, and they can kill a bid by saying, no, you're not allowed to bid it. But assuming you get through that process and they think they've got a reasonable proposal in and they've got a certain margin which is workable for that piece of work, and then they get in there, and as almost always happens, you find out it's more complicated and harder and longer than you thought it was, then that's when the difficult conversations start to happen. As the multiple hierarchies within the firm, but at the delivery level, say the state of California account, they've got to deliver a number to corporate HQ, and it doesn't matter what's happening on that project, you've got to deliver that number, and that's what you're personally measured on. So they've got to do something. So either you've got a way to skinny back resources, get additional money out of the state, cut down scope, be more efficient, which is the hardest one of all, but they have to do something. They're going to not get any relief internally from that commitment, because that's what's being decided. Now, of course, if you're a strategic client and they really want the relationship to work, they may be willing to say, well, okay, well, with lesson learned, we understand we're not going to make the money we thought we were going to make. Our relationship with the state or this particular client is so important, it doesn't matter. In the long term, we still have to, deliver, but there's going to be a lot of pressure placed on the individual delivery people, and it's a very stressful position to be in. Barbara?
Kind of an observation of the question. So you had said earlier that the vendors are getting more and more aggressive in the contracts or trying to get projects but at the same time, the state has a completely different personnel process.
Yes, it does.
We cannot get around civil service laws. So I think sometimes when it comes to managing resources, you're almost set, you can push on the vendor and say, you must replace this resource, and they can say, you must replace that one, and we say,
right.
Civil service, not much we can do. So how, if it is moving towards faster or speedier projects, how are vendors and states going to maintain a relationship and still have civil service responsibilities in place?
Yeah, I have no good answer to that. Yeah, but part of the challenge, I think, and I think it gets to the question about sort of risk we brought up earlier, is my opinion is the answer is not to keep the projects the same size they are, but try and make them faster. It's to rethink the way you do the project so the projects are smaller, and that way you can get them done quicker. I mean, there's only so you can't accelerate these projects very much further than they're already being accelerated. Everybody's already burning a mile a minute, you know.
I think the opportunity is, I don't know if it will be successful, the opportunity is to educate our sponsors, who ultimately are the recipients of our big projects, and our control agencies, whether it be whoever it might be, DGS, Department of Finance, or whatever, to look at our staffing models and you know, rather than have a procurement and a project that goes 5 or 6 or even 10 years long, you accelerate that process, you front load, bring in good people, and they're going to have to be able to want to approve new positions, but then they may say, then, you know, we want more limited term positions and so forth. But I really see the state going that way, and so the control agencies and our sponsors are going to have to recognize that and step up. If they don't, then it won't happen.
Maybe we could approach looking at state resources for IT projects differently.
That would be an interesting topic for a follow-up discussion. There isn't a HR track on this one, maybe for a follow-up session that would be good. Last point I want to make on the managing resources piece, it goes back to sort of the vendor finances. And again, I'll share with you something that one of our government advisory board members does as a tool that she's found very effective. And it's particularly if you're dealing with a large publicly traded firm, the quarter end is a big deal for them. They're really measured on what happens on the quarter end. And so the particular tool that this executive has done is she sits down with her vendor at the beginning of every quarter and says, what do you need to get done this quarter? Like what's your target internally for the quarter that you have to meet? And then they put a plan together to make sure that they get it figured out. And what it avoids is a huge amount of distraction in the last 2 weeks of the quarter, where they're like, we need this invoice, we need to get this paid, we need to get this stuff delivered, how do we get this done? And try and get that out of the way, because it becomes a big distraction towards the end of a quarter. They're getting intense pressure on their side to get things booked. And like I've been in, you know, prior employer of mine, last 2 days of the quarter, they have a bell on the floor and they'll like ring the bell when they get a sale in, because there's a real sort of impetus. So what she did was actually sit down and just have the quarter negotiated in advance with the vendor, so they have a plan. And it just gets it all out of the way. You know, again, it's open and honest, and they know what they need to get out of each other, and it just avoids all the hassle towards the last few weeks.